but trees, alternative virtual reality.
So friend generator is that is simultaneously the name of the art piece and the art collective or artist collective. I mean, or how do you?
Yeah. We originally, it was the name of the collective, and then when we did the piece for Museum of Other Realities, we had just decided that that would be the name for the work inside the museum, just because that was sort of spawned from the fact that we had this original work that was for a physical installation. And then we had started playing with a Quest and wondering if we could. That previous work was done on a Vive, and so we started figuring, trying to port it over to the Quest. But of course, the original work was tracking the entire body, and the Quest only gives you these 3 points of motion
Right.
tracking. So, so we just kind of decided that it was different enough that it needed a new name. And the guys at Moore really liked the idea of just calling it Friend Generator because of the sort of cheeky implication of
Yes.
generating friends of yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah. So could you explain? Basically, I mean, I'm going to add in the video because I filmed myself when I was trying it out. I went into the Museum of Other Realities for your art piece, Friend Generator, and walked around, and yeah, I think I ended up creating some sort of ritualistic dance with myself. It was really interesting. But could you explain how it works and what's the thought behind the design and so on?
Yeah, I think it would be useful to kind of explain like where it came from, because
Yeah.
it was really based on an earlier installation that we did. But just to kind of I guess set the table, as it were. The work that's in the museum, what is essentially happening is that every 8 seconds, so you enter in the piece, you are in fully embodied in this avatar, and every 8 seconds you can have copies of yourself. So the longer you persist within the space, the more copies of yourself sort of populate the space with you, and there are all sort of echoes of yourself through time. So you once you kind of figure out the mechanics, um, you have a scenario where you're kind of thinking about what the things that you do currently in the present will happen in the future with your copies. So it's you're kind of placed in this interesting sort of position in time where you're kind of present, but also presently with your past selves, and thinking about what you're doing currently and how that will affect in the future your past selves. So you can do things like, as you mentioned, create a dance where you're interacting with your past selves. You can like give yourself a high five and then wait 8 seconds and turn around and high five yourself back, and that kind of thing, right? So it can become a very playful space. And yeah, the original work for that this project sort of sprung out of was a physical installation for an exhibition in Toronto called 5Rs, which is a VR festival.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was originally based on the work of an artist from the 60s and 70s by the name of Dan Graham, who is a media artist. And he did a piece called Time Delay Room. He actually did sort of 12 instances of this installation. And in his original work, he was using video technology, which was new at the time. So a closed circuit video technology where the viewer would see themselves on a monitor. There was multiple monitors and two cameras, and you would see yourself on the monitor, and the other monitor you would see the same view but delayed in time. So you're kind of always caught in between, am I looking at myself currently, or am I looking at myself in the past? And he was really interested in these ideas of sort of what happens to ourself, our perception
Yeah.
of ourselves, when we're sort of being mediated through these technologies and time. So so when we did the original installation, we essentially recreated one of his earlier art pieces from the 70s, but just added this twist to it where, not only do you get repeated on the video screens that you see within the installation, but you get repeated in your sort of avatar form through time. And so when we were deciding to do the Quest version, we sort of started from that basic mechanic. And the museum, the guys who run more saw something we had posted on Reddit and really loved the idea and invited us to kind of make a version of it for more.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really cool experience because, yeah, there was something that happened after playing with it for a while because I don't know, there is something about the embodiment and like you said, I mean, planning ahead, but also you are looking at what happened in the past and you are also simultaneously where you are. And I mean, there is a tendency just in normal human consciousness that we are, of course, spread out or manifested through time, right? I mean, we have a past, we're living in the present, and we're planning for the future. But doing this in like this embodied way, it was sort of a way to actually enhance the way that we are structuring ourselves through time. So it was a really interesting experience. But yeah,
I mean, that's somewhat so I'm also a PhD student, and I come from a media arts background, and all of my research now is essentially around these ideas that you're talking about. So and essentially I'm really interested in this medium, VR, having the potential to, exactly as you say, heighten certain experiences that we may that are happening all the time, but are kind of always sort of under the surface, or we're not consciously always consciously aware that they're going on. And I think that art within VR art in particular is well suited for sort of allowing us to amplify those processes.
Yeah.
And so exactly, the work is exactly kind of asking those questions and asking us to think about, how we think of ourselves in time, and sort of those processes of memory and also projection into the future. So.
Yeah, I really enjoy, I mean, any kind of work that is trying to gain a new perspective, especially on ourselves, but also the world. And one of the studies that I'm often mentioning to people when they ask me why I'm so enthusiastic about VR is these studies on virtual embodiment where you're able to relate to yourself in another way, like telling a story to a psychiatrist, and suddenly you are the psychiatrist hearing yourself being told the story, and these things, because it's just so fascinating. And there are also so few applications out there, I feel, that you can actually try. I mean, there are very, very many interesting things in the research, but in the art space, for instance, it's really nice to see applications like yours, or art pieces like yours that are making sense of this.
The funny thing is, it's like, I feel like, well, like the study, for example, I think it's the Mel Slater's coming out of his work that you're referencing. And I feel like those experiments are amazing. And it's interesting to me to think that I feel like the media artists have been sort of dealing with these questions for a very long time. Part of the reason why this original installation, uh, another sort of reason that we created it was this idea that we and I started thinking about VR and thinking about the potentials of VR. Um, and thinking about specifically the perception of the self as we're embodied in these avatars. It occurred to me that these are the exact same questions that were being asked by artists like Dan Graham back in the 70s, but it wasn't
Yeah.
VR he was asking these questions through. It was video, right?
Mm.
When video was introduced, it was the first time that we were able to see this sort of external perspective of ourselves um, in real time, and aside from using two mirrors, right? um, but I can only imagine sort of what was that feeling of sort of disembodiment, right? Or uh, where you see yourself on a TV screen and the camera's sort of behind you somewhere back
Yes.
here, and you see yourself from behind. You have this very strange perspective of sort of like, that's me, but it doesn't feel like me. So you of course do something like this, right? You do that. So there's this sort of, it's the same thing, and I think that happens in VR, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like you look at these hands and go, okay, that's me, but is it really me? Um and I think that those questions that were being asked and sort of probed by these artists in the 60s and 70s, they can help guide us into how we might think about those same questions in VR. So
Yeah.
that's part of the impetus for that original project, and sort of it's guiding a lot of my work as well. Instead of sort of thinking, oh, this is all brand new territory, kind of uh, like thinking about how others in the past have really sort of um, raised similar questions, but just in different media. So,
Yeah, and then it can be enhanced by actually doing it virtually. I mean, you're mentioning this, but like identification with the things that you're seeing, and I don't know if you were thinking about these studies, but there are some. It sounded like it. There are some interesting studies on out of body experiences which you can have with virtual reality, and especially like having the camera behind you, connected to
mm,
a head-mounted display. I think that was also, yeah, I mean, among the same kind of researchers at least, but when they did this, so I like imagine you had a 360-degree camera about 2 meters behind you with a live feed to a head-mounted display, so that you're looking forward to the back of your head. And then they did these inspired from the rubber hand illusions, where they actually scratch your back, so you're seeing yourself or your back being scratched in front of you, but feeling it behind you. And then they
right.
found that the people felt basically drawn to the body in front of them, as if that was what they were actually going to identify with. And that is very weird, where you're basically existing in some sort of limbo between your virtual self and your real body. Yeah, it's just weird, but those kind of phenomenological experiments are fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It it's interesting because I think that it's the thing that separates VR from those earlier forms of media, um, is that is exactly what you're talking about. This is sense of embodiment or disembodiment, and sort of the fact that we can control our entire environment. Uh, how does if we believe that perception and how we make meaning of the world, this is something I firmly believe in, and it's only been strengthened by my work in VR, is if the way in which we make sense of the world is largely through our embodied self, um, then if and our interactions with the environment that we perceive ourselves to be inside, then what forms of sort of so-called higher level cognitive processes are possible because we can control the bodies that we're in and our interactions with the environment, right? Because reality sort of confines us to gravity and the rules of physics, the laws of physics.
Hmm.
So I'm just very much interested in sort of it. Well, in VR, we don't have to have the laws of physics. We don't have to have these bodies, and yet we perceive ourselves to be in these bodies and to be within these environments. So, uh, are there sort of higher level cognitive processes that just have not been able to be to have existed prior, right? Because
Yeah.
we can have control over those of those variables. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, often what is defining any sort of given system or entity is the constraints that are put on it, or like the relationship between the constraints and the affordances of anything, and especially for human beings also. But when we take these away, then yeah, I mean, what are people going to do? I think that virtual reality is probably still extremely confined and limited by these sort of artificial horizons that we are putting on it because we're so used to normal reality. And of course, there are very many ways in which, of course, we still have to relate to our organism in terms of providing visual stimuli that is adapted to our eyes in 3D and stereo and all that. But the various ways of perhaps manifesting, I mean, like avatars, I've yet to check out the fabric of reality thing that is going on in Museum of Other Realities now. But I think that is also a really interesting way um, to see how we can express ourselves. I've seen some videos on it, but yeah.
I haven't had a chance to check out that project either. But I mean, even at a rudimentary level, we have, even if we're sort of confined to sort of the physical reality we're actually in, there are things like in our work, it's about time, right? So how you can manipulate time in a way that's just not possible in reality. But also things like scale, I think, has gone
Yes.
largely unexplored in many ways, right? Because I do think that, and then those things I think are related in some ways, right? So so again, like what is the potential for different levels of understanding if we can just change the very rudimentary like the very, very basic relations to our environment. It's very exciting. It's a very exciting time
Yeah, it
to be
is.
working in this stuff. So yeah.
It is, and
What
there
about
are
your own work
also
though? I'm curious about your own work. But like, what kind
yeah.
of work you're doing? I watched your video on the sensory deprivation tank,
Yeah,
and
nice.
I immediately looked up like, where can I find a sensory deprivation tank in my city? Because like this looks so amazing. There's like so much. It just looks something that I would be very interested in trying. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm so curious to hear what your experiences were like and what kind of work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an ideal research study for me, really. But it's mainly hobby work or like YouTube work or personal, yeah, stuff that I like to do. But that is the kind of thing that would be really interesting to do research on, like because I mean, immersion is an important thing in VR, right? And like technological immersion, the degree to which your senses are being replaced by virtuality. But it would be interesting to write a paper on basically like anti-immersion, or I mean that immersion could equally as well be the removal of your senses from the physical environment and then resubstituting these for the virtual. So the flotation tank experiment was super interesting. It would be nice, however, to have other participants do it and to fix the hardware so that you could do it for a longer period of time with not as much stress. Because yeah, like logistically, it wasn't necessarily easy. But the feeling of being in the tank normally, when you lose yourself of bodily self-consciousness, which I was able to do probably like for a 15-minute interval during that hour or something, that is there's really something magical about that, because not having an embodied perspective of virtuality is weird. So it gets very psychedelic very quickly, and you don't really need the VR headset to do that. The tank is just amazing in itself. So I'm not going to say that I prefer using VR in the tank. Even it was a super interesting way of using the tank, but yeah, the tank is just amazing. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of my in terms of my regular work as a PhD candidate, I'm studying sort of personal virtual realities, or virtual reality memory palaces. So I want to give people an environment that they can populate with things as they wish, and I want them to ascribe a meaning to the virtual environment. So in some way provide a way to study how people can have meaningful relationships to VR. So it's a very open and explorative approach. And I'm studying like methods of getting their phenomenological accounts of the relationship to the environments, for instance, by doing interviews like this in VR, where people are referencing their things, showing me around, and also trying to contribute to post-phenomenological theory in this domain to see how virtual reality are actually mediating the people's worlds and their relationship towards them, sort of the subjectivity and objectivity of their experience. Yeah, so that would be the pitch.
Tell me more about this post-phenomenological theory. I'm very curious, because it sounds something that I
I think you actually,
yeah,
I was thinking of mentioning it because so post-phenomenology is basically it's post-phenomenology in the sense that it's focused on the way that technology is affecting human beings. So I mean, you have phenomenological philosophy of technology, as Martin Heidegger, for instance, which is super interesting and very tempting, but it's not a very constructive philosophy of technology, because it's really sort of framing all the technologies as one thing, like a metaphysical way of viewing the world, like as a way to get from A to B. So it's a very pessimistic view of technology that doesn't really account for the various ways. I mean, technology is not just one thing. That would be a post-phenomenological way of criticizing Martin Heidegger's sort of technology. So post-phenomenology is still attentive to the actual phenomenology or the experience as it is manifesting itself through use. So it would claim that it's more phenomenological than these other theory things. But more concretely, it's viewing. I mean, if I am driving a car, for instance, then one of these the researchers who sort of coined the term post-phenomenology was Don Ide, and he would speak of embodiment, for instance, how you are embodying. You have an embodiment relation to the car, and that means that you are not acting with or on the car, but you're acting through the car. So the car is sort of becoming transparent in your use of it. So you're relating to the world through the car, and that would be an embodiment relation. So the way that post-phenomenology is sort of structuring or viewing these various relationships is that it's seeing how your subjectivity is changing in relation to your world by means of the technology. So, I mean, you were mentioning that you're mediating yourself. or mediating your environment. And that would be a very post-phenomenological way of speaking about this. So when I'm driving a car, my subjectivity is changed because I am now a driving man. I am yeah, right? And the world is suddenly becoming accessible to me because of this. So yeah, it's post-phenomenology would also say that technologies are co-constituting the subjectivity and objectivity. So it doesn't view me as a subjectivity that is using a technology against the world, but it views my particular way of being as arising from the technological mediation.
That's really fascinating. It sounds very much like it reminds me of Gibson, the whole ecological approach to perception. That it is co-constituted by our position within an environment. It's not just or these ideas of from neuroscience of distributed cognition, right, where our cognition is not just something that happens within our brains, but it happens sort of out in our interactions with the environment, and is co-constituted. Or this interaction right here, it's being co-constituted. And not only you and I in our personal backgrounds, but also the fact that we're both in these avatars and wearing these headsets and using this technology with this particular software platform and everything else. And that to me seems not only does it seem like the cognitive neurosciences seem to reinforce these ideas through neuroimaging, but also it just seems logical to me that this is the way that it is, right? I think it seems very the more that I read and the more that I kind of learn and the more that I explore within the space, it seems to me very what's the right word? I don't want to be too judgmental, but it seems to me very selfish to think that the only thing that's happening is within my brain, right? That I am not just my brain, but I'm also my relations to in all these different ways. Yeah,
I completely agree.
Yeah, no. That's really fascinating. Have you read? I've just been reading Maxine Sheets Johnstone. Do you know her work?
No, I don't think so.
She's a phenomenologist. I just started her book, I think 2 days ago, called The Primacy of Movement. Called The Primacy of Movement.
Oh, okay.
And she's a really interesting person because not only is she a phenomenologist, she's a philosopher, but she's also comes from a dance background.
Oh, nice.
And her work is all talking about sort of how it's movement, so animate forms, is sort of the basis of all cognition. Everything that we can know is through movement. And so she heavily critiques sort of mind-body dualism and and sort of these approaches, and also critiques what these approaches, what they lead to, what kind of thinking they lead to, and sort of how some of these very famous I was just reading yesterday, some of these very famous philosophical problems just don't make any sense when you start to think about the primacy of embodiment and movement. So that the famous philosophical thought experiment Mary, the neuroscientist. Do you know this one?
I'm not sure, but please go on, tell it.
It's the one where so the thought experiment is Mary is trapped in a room and everything within that room is black and white. But she has access through a television, through books, to knowledge about how color works. So she understands the physics. She understands neurologically what's happening when we look at the color red, but nothing within her environment, anywhere, has color. It's all completely black and white.
Hmm.
And then one day, as the thought experiment goes, she's let out of the room into the real world, and she's able to see a rose, a red rose. And so then the thought experiment, the question is, does she learn something new?
Right.
And it's, the idea is that thinking about this thought experiment, it's like, well, if you believe that all cognition is just what's happening within your mind, then you would believe that she doesn't learn anything new. But if you believe that our cognition happens within our interactions with the world, and I think on a gut level, at least for me, when I first read that thought experiment, it's like, yes, of course she learned something new, right? She's never seen red. It doesn't matter how much you read about it or think about it. So, and what Johnstone argues is that the whole thought experiment doesn't make any sense because you would have no way of comprehending things like leaving a room, like, because you would have no idea of inside and out, because your body, your movement, if you're just trapped in one singular spot, the metaphor of inside and out, which is built on the primal metaphor of actually moving through space, right? Our encounters with the environment, all the sort of abstract levels are built on our movement through space. And so the very concepts of inside and outside wouldn't make any sense because you have no, essentially you're just a brain in a vat, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't build those higher level concepts because the foundation just isn't there. So the whole, for Sheets Johnstone, the whole thought experiment just doesn't make any sense. And I find that really, really powerful and really, really exciting when we think about, the implications for VR, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that was a really fascinating experiment, by the way. And I'm also thinking of, I mean, the book that really blew me away in terms of trying to abolish the various dualisms of like self and body and also just mind and world, subjectivity and objectivity was Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception, which I found to be really challenging in terms of that thinking. But it's also just so brilliant. And I mean, he would say that the body knows, right? And that would account also for, learning something. What is happening then? Are you're sort of meeting yourself in another way, right? And maybe that's also the case with VR, that it's a new way for us to meet ourselves. When we're looking outside, yeah, sure, we're looking outside, but we're looking outside at how we outside ourselves. So I mean, yeah.
I do think that that's sort of the I mean, for my work, in terms of the art creation, is about asking these questions and then and sort of hopefully using the technology to heighten the awareness of these processes that are happening sort of almost precognitively, almost, right? Because they're just our bodies in space. We're not often thinking about these processes.
Yeah.
But for me, it's thinking about those processes as the underlying foundation for all the other abstract thought, and it's also, those are the processes for me that I feel are the processes that are universal, right? Everyone, regardless of sort of the higher, more abstract ideas of things like identity, we all at the very basic level have bodies that move through space, and if we can, the potential of sort of reflecting back on that sort of primal foundation is a way of hopefully recognizing that that is something we do have in common, and not only in common with other human beings, but all what is essentially all animate life forms, right?
Yeah.
And that there's a common foundation for all of it, and that and I think that's like when I think about my work and think about my work within this medium, ultimately that's the goal, I think, is to kind of like find a way to make us relate to each other in a way that reminds us of these ideas, right? And I think that VR is a pretty powerful medium for helping us kind of think about those processes that we normally just take for granted. It's very easy to get caught up in all the other stuff, right?
Yeah, it is.
So
I think there is something about
I actually think
no, sorry. Go on.
go. No, please.
Okay. So, I mean, you're mentioning bodies and movement, and I'm just curious to hear some of your reflections on like the meditative or like mindfulness aspect of these things, because I started doing mindfulness, quite a few years ago, and I mean, in terms of self or mind and body dualisms, I mean, that was definitely my worldview before I sort of basically just paid a little bit attention. It wasn't even much. I was just figuring out that I had a body, just feeling it, sort of paying attention to regular things going on, and that grounded me in a way that I wouldn't think was possible. Actually, being able just to listen and synchronize with the body and the breath, and it's just changed a whole lot of things in terms of how I understand myself and the world, which is why I think it's so interesting, the work that you're doing. I mean, one of the times when I was going into the friend generator, and I was watching myself, like the maybe third incarnation, 8-second incarnation of myself, that also made me reflect on my posture and the expressions of it. After which I tried to do like different things and so on. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that aspect of it?
Yeah. So the genesis, the beginning of what ended up being in the Museum of Other Realities was so when I started my studies, I came from a media arts background. So the first time I tried VR, which I think is these sort of stories of like the first time I tried VR is, I think, a really interesting story, and someone should collect them. But
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like
true.
the first time I tried VR, I was immediately struck by I think it's what a lot of people think, which is just like, this is it. This is it, right? Like this is where the potential just hits you immediately. And I was completely floored. And so it made me want to explore this even more. And so my first experiments were actually in giving myself a body, because the first time I tried VR, I didn't have a body. I was just a sort of disembodied viewpoint. And so my first experiments were giving myself a body. And so, of course, when you're developing in VR and you give yourself a body, one of the first challenges you have is you need to be able to see yourself, right? From an outside perspective, to confirm that you indeed have a body. Like, you can look down and see it, but it's nice to have a mirror. So I created a mirror, right? And it's like, oh, there I am, right? That's working. And then it occurred to me that because the way that when you code these things, the mirror is just a camera on you.
Yeah.
And you're just, using that texture on a cube, right, to show you the view of the camera. And it occurred to me, well, that's just a camera. Maybe I can delay it, right? What would that look like? And there was already a bit of a lag because it's early days, right? And so I started playing with delaying the view. And then I thought, oh, this is really interesting. There's something very interesting that's happening here. And so everything that followed just followed from that line of thought of just making something and then experiencing it and then seeing what kind of questions that experience leads to, and then making more work that kind of answers or addresses those questions, and
Yeah.
then iterating in that way. So yeah, and then and that's when it reminded me of what Dan Graham was doing, and then that kind of started a process of making that work and so on. So and it brings us to the work that's in the Museum of Other Realities. So I'm not sure if that answers your question really,
Yeah,
but
no, that's fascinating. I would also really like to try
um
that with some actual trackers on, I mean, on my feet and so on. That would be
yeah.
so much powerful, I can imagine.
Well, this is the thing is I remember, your original question was about gestures, right? And how you can see yourself, your posture and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and
It's
just, I
really
mean, yeah.
it's really one of the things that struck me. I remember I was in the lab and working on something, and I had left this was in Vive. I had left the Vive controller sort of on a table away from me, and I had asked somebody, "Oh, could you hand me the controller? It's too far from me." And I was tethered, right? And so they picked it up, and I could see it sort of moving right towards me, the controller, and I was really struck by looking at that controller just moving through space, how how much information is being
Yes.
uh sent in that exchange, right? You could see the person's gait,
Mm.
and you could see very clearly that this was not that this wasn't just like a canned animation, like that
Yeah.
a computer wasn't interpolating two positions in space, that there's something very lively, even just somebody moving a controller
Mm.
in space. So yeah, so then like, that was another point for me thinking about that, is just yeah, how much information we
Yes.
convey in this in these 3 points of tracking, right? Like even just you and I talking like this, um just how much information is being transmitted back and forth, and how we
Yeah.
interpret that as individuals.
It's true. I
And
mean,
then
yeah,
when you
no,
add the
like,
extra tracking,
yeah.
it really does, it really does enhance that exchange of information.
Yeah, and that's how they're doing video games now, right? I mean, no serious video game is sort of trying to sit inside like a game developer to do each frame of some sort of movement. I mean, you're an android right now or something like a robot, but
Yeah.
it's very easy to see that you're a human based on the way that you're moving your head when you talk, your hands, and so on.
Hmm.
It really shines through. And
Hmm.
yeah, so how, I mean, seeing that human aspect, that's also, I mean, why I'm interested to do these podcasts in VR too, because I mean, I feel the social connection when you're talking to people in that way, and I feel more so than on Zoom or Skype. Of course, you do have facial expressions there which are lacking here and so on, but I mean, when we get that in VR too, but already now, how much we communicate with our bodies, that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting that you're mentioning this, because I'm working on a project right now that is going to be part of an exhibit that's going online in October.
Oh, nice.
And it's not in VR, and mainly the reason that originally it was going to be kind of a lot like what you saw in the Museum of Other Realities, but one of the reasons why we're not continuing in VR for this particular exhibit is because not enough people have headsets.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And so it felt like uh it felt too limiting to stay within VR, given the sort of current I guess market penetration of headsets. Not enough people would be able to experience it. But so we're sticking with this sort of virtual environment. But the whole project is built on this idea of uh, Zoom or Skype, sort of, or video in general. We get two dimensions, but we don't get that depth, that sense of depth.
Yeah.
And and it's undeniable that something is lost in that missing dimension. While we do get facial expressions, as you mentioned, I feel like there's something very meaningful that's lost we don't have that third dimension. And so the project, what we're doing is I have a Connect, an Azure Connect sensor, depth sensor. And so I'm using it to capture the motion, 2 minutes of movement from a range of dance artists, some of which I've collaborated with in the past. And I'm giving them this prompt, which is essentially, think about your body as an archive of movement, and improvise 2 minutes of movement around this idea of your body as an archive of information, and that information is movement, and it relays actual information for other people to understand, and it relays knowledge, it transmits knowledge, your body. And these, of course, are people who this is what they do, right? Right. They're well attuned to thinking about transmitting knowledge through movement. So, and then I'm going to represent this movement data in a way that allows a user who downloads this application to interact with it. I'm still not exactly clear what form the interaction is going to take yet, but it's built on this idea of what is lost given the current pandemic, by forcing us to interact through Zoom or Skype, and what are the potential gains of using other media. What other forms of knowledge can we delve into or understand or transmit and receive if we can just add that third dimension? And also the ability to control that information too, so through interaction. So for example, you might be say, get rid of the dimension of time and show me all the movement over 2 minutes, right? What kind of knowledge can a user looking at that information gain that wouldn't be there if they just watched a video of the same dance, for example? But yeah, so this is all, it seems like it's all related. It
is. Well, I think that when people have been communicating so much as they have the last 6 months or so, with the Zoom and Skype, that people are, I mean, everyone has sort of suddenly experienced one way of communication or one way of mediation that has taken over something which primarily was done non-mediated, or at least not in such an explicit way. And you notice it in your body. I think one of the things that I like about VR is that I don't have as many other things around me, because it's like you have the thing that you're supposed to be doing in this little square. That's sort of the important thing. But then you have things around you that are given to you completely. I mean, they are there with their, I mean, you have what you see, you can touch it, use it and everything, but this little frame where you're supposed to act through is, it's there's just something wrong with it. It's just not the normal way in which we view things. I don't know. It's fascinating anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly challenging, right? Because given the pandemic, we're sort of forced into this scenario, and it seems like a real opportunity to kind of because everyone's experiencing the same lack of contact, right? And being forced to mediate their communications through these technologies, that it seems like a real opportunity for an environment like this, for example, or VR as a technology in general, to really have an opportunity to show its potential as an alternative.
Mhm.
I'm enjoying this though. I haven't had a lot of opportunities to like interact with other people through
Yeah,
VR.
right.
There's been a few chances, but it definitely I feel like it's a lot. I don't know. I feel much more at home speaking like this than I do through a little box on a screen, I guess you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, it's quite all right,
And
right?
definitely less conscious. I'm definitely less conscious about my uh messy room around me, or like
Yeah.
my children running in or something like that. So
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I think it works as well. There is a sense, I mean, that's would be like the phenomenological way of describing media, but that there is this like concealing, revealing structure to everything that is being mediated, so that some things are being translated or transformed or heightened, whereas some things are just hidden. And what I mean Zoom is doing is that it's really giving you the visual details, but at the cost of a framing, and only giving you that frame in the high resolution. And it's also, of course, removing taste, it's removing touch, it's removing 3D. But VR is giving you an environment and full body contact, and that's what you're missing. I mean, at least partially in the Zoom things. But yeah, I don't know. There is this. You have to pick one. You can't have it all apparently right now. If you're going to for facial
yeah,
expressions, you might have to use the Zoom or the Skype, but then you're losing some other things. But maybe in the future there will be a far better compromise in terms of this revealing, concealing structure of the media.
I think it's interesting because like even as you're speaking, while we don't have facial expressions, even the little animation of
Yeah.
your mouth moving, actually it's you got this like beak that's moving. Even that is in to a certain degree expressive, and I feel like the expressivity of that animation really does enhance the experience, right? It
Yeah.
really helps me understand um on another level the actual words that you're saying, right? Without it, I think uh there would be a certain channel of information that'd be closed off, and my brain would have to do extra work, or might not
Mm.
get the same meaning, would not get the same meaning um that it might receive with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and yeah, I do think it's only a matter of time. There's already headsets with eye trackers in them, and
It's true.
it's only a matter of time before we're tracking the mouth and the nose, the rest of the face, and then mapping that onto our representations in VR.
Yeah, I mean, I even saw a paper by some Oculus researchers, like maybe a year ago or something, where they had actually successfully tracked the lips onto like a photorealistic
Mm.
avatar inside an HMD, which I think I read it like ironically one day after I read in the book by Jaron Lanier, like The Dawn of the New Everything, that he thought that would be really hard and maybe not possible to do. So that was fun. Uh, but yeah, I mean, some things are nice as well. I mean, like the way that it conceals things. I mean, I'm able to do this podcast, for instance, in these fantastic environments. Um, and like you said, your room can be messy. You don't have to do any makeup for the camera lights. So some concealing is of course nice and part of the medium itself. We just need to see what kind of things we want to let through as well.
Yeah, it's nice to have the option, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's nice to have that option. I've been playing with the Connect in Unity, and looking at mapping so bringing a little bit of the real world back into it. So mapping the point cloud data of the body, the real body, back into the space. My hope, at least in the future, when we're all sort of back to being allowed to be in spaces together, physical, real spaces, is to continue this work and perhaps instead of using trackers, like Vive trackers to track the feet and the waist and the rest of the body, because there is in the previous versions of my work, there's a whole onboarding process of like having to sit people down and put on trackers on their ankles and their waist, get them to carry these controllers and put on the headset. And I feel like as much as that technology somewhat disappears, we're always quite aware of it, right? You know, you were talking about driving a car and sort of it being this sort of extension of our our body schema, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
You know, when you're aware of the trackers, there's a sort of starts to become a disconnect between the sense of immersion and then the reality of having this thing on your ankle that you can be very aware of, because it's, let's say, moving around, right? It's not quite anchored in a way securely or for whatever reason, or it falls off.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden your foot is like over there. So I'm interested in a technology like the Kinect, which is just, you know, you just set it up or set a few of them up in a space, and then you just walk in as your own person and it sees the whole body. And then it can map that directly into a 3-dimensional space, virtual space like this. And then it feels a lot more natural. And you can map that onto an avatar like this, or you can map it onto point cloud data that's more of a closer representation of what, you know, the clothes that you're actually wearing, and so on and so on. So
that would probably be smooth.
Sorry, what was that?
That would probably be a really smooth way, so that you can just step into it and experience it without any sort of, I mean, even when you're taking on the tracker, you're thinking, oh, okay, so this is going to do that and that, but you won't get caught by the surprise maybe in the same way.
Yeah, I'm wondering how far we are from that, because I mean, these controllers are great, but I mean, already the Quest has the hand tracking, right?
Yeah,
so you don't even need the controllers, it's doing the hand tracking for you. I wonder how far we are from just like putting on the headset and then everything else is just being tracked by maybe one camera you set up in the room that's very small, and you know, you don't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, because you would need the external sensors, but yeah, maybe it can be simple.
Yeah.
So your PhD, like dissertation wise, I mean, how does that work in the media? Like, how are you conceptualizing this stuff? Or do you have
Right. Those are good questions, and I haven't quite figured them out myself, to be honest with you. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I feel like for my dissertation, it's a arts-based research is what I'm doing. So there's going to be a creation side of things, and then there's going to be the written dissertation side of things. And one of the challenges, I think, with arts-based research is exactly the kind of questions that are asked of a PhD student, which is, you know, what is the new knowledge that you're adding to the world? You know, why is this knowledge valuable? What is the gap in knowledge, and how are you filling that gap? And that's a funny question to ask an artist, right? Like, if you're a painter and you paint a painting, it's an interesting question to point to the painting and say, what is the new knowledge that is being added to the world with this painting? It's so one of the challenges of doing this kind of work is in some ways, in the language of sort of humanities scholarship, justifying your own work.
Right.
Using that language, which is often sort of alien to the work itself, or
Yeah.
that method of working. So, but on the same, but I do believe that making art and creating art is one way, actually in a very accessible way, to, at least in my work, art has the ability to heighten our capacity for understanding processes of knowledge creation in a way that perhaps other forms struggle with. So, and what I mean by that is particularly art in VR, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, but the idea that, you know, we can it heightens our capacity of understanding how we encounter the environment through our bodies. And for me, my belief that that all knowledge emerges from those encounters. So the idea that the art will help us sort of or make us more aware of those processes. If I were to write a book instead of make an art piece about the same ideas, I feel like the book, while it could explain these processes, it relies on the higher level processes of cognition, like language and discourse, right? And whereas art, VR art, can speak directly through those processes. So in terms of my PhD, that's roughly, I think, how I'm thinking about these sort of questions that are asked of doctoral students, like knowledge, what kind of knowledge, and why is it important, and, you know, but it's definitely going to be a challenge, I think.
That's the fun kind of challenge.
Yeah.
We
What
have
about yourself, though? I mean,
it's a good question. I mean, I'm also on the verge, right? I mean, I'm trying to keep it as abstract and sort of philosophical as possible, but there is, quite luckily, at least some leeway within. I would be contributing to sort of like human computer interaction, and they have many projects that are involved with more art and just exploring experience, or exploring mediation for what it is, and so on. So there is luckily seemingly a lot of room, but I'm not sure. I'm going to I mean, I found the post-phenomenology thing, which I think can help me use some sort of language and position it in relation to like a philosophical discipline, as well as post-phenomenology has been used in design like the last 4 years or something. So it looks like it's there is a way there that people are just there is some research that people are creating these counterfactual artifacts, basically creating something very weird, and people are supposed to live with these things in their homes, and they're just seeing how they're reacting and how this is mediating their world. So it's very explorative and very, very strange stuff, like just a machine with a lot of paper that is sometimes moving in this direction and so on. So within HCI and human computer interaction, there is really some space for just exploring, and I think that is fascinating and important.
I am totally down with like weird experiments and just like because I think that, you know, the sort of the experiential level of, for example, like having some weird thing that's in your home and you just kind of have to exist and live with it. undeniably there's value in the experience. It's just how when you're forced to write about it,
Yeah.
right? That's the challenge, right? Without just saying, yeah, of course. Living with this weird thing in my home, change, it had some changes. So it's like, do you if you quantify it, how do you quantify it? And what kind of method are you using to measure that experience, or describe the experience? And I think that's really the presents the challenge, right?
Yeah. I don't think they're really quantifying
Yeah.
stuff. It's more like, yeah, studying the qualitative experience, and yeah, based on phenomenological accounts, just seeing how people reflect on their own existence in relation to technologies, in relation to, I mean, both technologies and art pieces, and art, of course, through technologies yeah, they're mediators, right? So they're mediating yourself and your reality in some way, and just gaining knowledge on that can contribute to theory on mediation, which is so prevalent in our society, should be super important, no matter uh, if you can't maybe do a statistical analysis on it, but that's of course beyond the point.
Yeah. Your audio is cutting out a little bit, so I didn't catch everything that you said, but I think I got
Oh,
the gist of it.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening.
I don't know if it's me though. This might be. I don't know if it's me or not. I'm just gonna check my settings because I have no idea why that would be the case. Maybe it's the.
You sound completely fine, at least.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well. Oh. Well, it was really. This is nice though. I was really. I can't tell you. I was really happy to discover your podcast, like your work, because I feel like there is a small but burgeoning community of scholars who are looking at this. And what's really exciting for me is that, we're all coming from all these different disciplines, right?
Yeah.
Like you're coming from HCI and I'm coming from media arts, but there's all sorts of people. There's some people at my school at York University that are looking at VR from psychology of perception, vision research, that side of things.
Yeah.
Mel Slater and his whole group, also coming from like psychology of perception. Just I don't know. I was really happy to hear it, because to discover your work, just because it was just so exciting to be like, oh yeah, my people.
Yeah,
Other
right.
people are out there doing this stuff. So yeah, I really do appreciate everything you're doing, and it's really nice to be able to have a chat like this.
Yeah, likewise, man. It's there are more and more people. The more I go on the web and like through Twitter and so on, people are doing so many interesting research projects and yeah, art projects, development project, everything. I mean, most likely people really just started a few years ago, and we will start to see the fruits of it in the coming years. And I can't wait to see what people are coming up with, and yeah, everything. So, anything else that you're doing? I mean, how far are you into your project?
Yeah, so that project is it's for the International Symposium on Electronic Art,
Oh, okay.
which was originally scheduled to happen in April, but then because of the pandemic, it was
Right.
canceled, and then it got pushed back to October and moved completely online.
Yeah.
So that's a big sort of international conference that's both an academic conference and an exhibition. So with that project, I think next week I'll be meeting with all of my dance artist collaborators and capturing their movement.
Cool.
And then bringing the movement into Unity. We're going to use Unity for this project. And then it's just a matter of iterating on ways to interact with the movement data. So, but ultimately we're thinking of the movement data as a data set. and
Yeah.
the user interaction is sort of um, allowing the user different ways of looking at that data set. And I do want to add an audio component to it as well. So there'll probably be some sort of generative audio that's
Okay.
based on both the movement and our relation to the movement. Um, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so that we're in the very early stages at the moment, but we hope to have it done by the end of September, and then it'll be exhibited. It'll go online, I think, sometime in the middle of October, and then people will be able to download it and try it. So we're excited about that. And then otherwise, I don't know. I mean, for my own dissertation work, my goal is actually to take a step back and go back to VR installation-based work, which is sort of meant for public consumption in a physical location. And I'm very interested in this idea of mapping the physical onto the virtual.
Yeah.
So like one of the challenges of making VR installation work, and if you've been to a VR festival, you know what this is like, where you end
Of
up with
course.
lineups,
Yeah.
right? So the idea would be to create an installation that has a projection as well as an experience for the headset. And so the person experiencing the work within the headset is within a virtual environment, but that environment sort of bleeds out into the real world via a projection on a wall that
Yeah, so that
those
the
who
others
are
can see it.
not in the experience, can see it. But also, I want to work, and this is why I started working with the Connect, is to bring the other people who are not in the headset into the virtual environment as some sort
Right.
of manifestations.
Yeah.
So the Connect can provide that. It can track multiple bodies in space, and you can use that information and bring it into the virtual environment for the person with the headset. And so I like this idea of like the virtual environment is like it's like a sort of world on top of the physical world. It's sort of like have you ever seen the Netflix show Stranger Things?
No, I haven't actually. I should.
Okay. Well, in that show, there's the concept of the upside down, which is basically our world, but like another dimension.
Yeah, right.
And like there's parts in that where a character is trapped in the other world, but they can sense him in the same space in the real world.
Yeah,
And I
nice.
love this idea of like a layer that's there that in the real world that's unseen, that you can only access through the headset.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's sort of like I'm sitting in a room right now, my computer's somewhere probably over here somewhere, and there's a wireless router next to it that's projecting electromagnetic energy throughout my house. And that if we could visualize that, that's like there's a world within this, that's beyond my perception, but it does exist, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have Wi-Fi. So I love this idea of like sort of worlds beyond our regular forms of human perception that exist,
Yeah,
because
that's
I do think
awesome.
that that actually, that is a reality of our world. We're just our the way that our senses work, our sensorial perception limits our ability to see
Yeah.
those worlds or perceive those worlds.
Yeah.
So that will be my dissertation work after this current project.
That sounds like a really great yeah, a lot of things to explore within that. I've been thinking of how I can do yeah, how many different things I can do with my own virtual apartment. So I have like a Unity project that is mapped one to my apartment, and I've been thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this? Right now, I made like a first-person shooter inside it, but that's not really at the core of my interests. So, but more like yeah, like the Wi-Fi signal thing. That is cool. it would have been interesting to map just how can you create a completely different world within the same sort of location parameters. That's a really good start for interesting projects, I think.
Well, have you read there's a philosophy essay by Thomas Nagel, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?
Yeah.
You know that one?
Yeah.
I always go back to that. Like, I think about if you could have sense perception that allows you to experience the world in a way that another organism, or maybe not even a way another organism experiences the world, but just in a different way than we normally perceive it, but it's
Yeah.
still the same world. How might that change the way that you relate to both the real world, given when you are no longer able to perceive it that way, but also to other organisms that might perceive it in that way, right?
Yeah.
I think that's like that's a very powerful potential for augmented reality. You know, if you could see the infrared spectrum beyond, or sorry, the visual spectrum beyond infrared and beyond and below, you know, like how might that change how we appreciate like color when we go back to our regular human perception, right? I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential there that has yet to be explored.
Yeah, there are so many worlds. I mean, especially in terms of how various organisms are perceiving things. In terms of like Nagel's essay, I bought a game. I was meant to review it for the YouTube channel. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but I might do so soon because you mentioned it. But there is a game that is called Blind, where you are navigating or perceiving the world through echolocation, I think. It's sort of a bit like a horror game simultaneously, which will make it rough to get to try it. But yeah, that might touch upon some of the things you're mentioning. It's all in black and white. I think it looks really cool from the trailers I've seen, like in terms of the aesthetics as well. So you might like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think Nagel would argue it's like, well, you're just changing the one modality into another. But it does sound like an awesome mechanic for a game. Although I have to admit, I get the sense that you're the same way. That the horror game is just not my genre. Like I don't need that stress in my life right now. So.
Yeah,
the real
terrifying.
world is kind of horrific as it is.
Yeah, it's true. I've only tried Resident Evil 7 in VR. I think I made it to about 70%, but that was only with playing with friends and so on. And every time I was in VR, it was like, okay, I can't wait until it's not my turn anymore. And I can look at some of my friends suffer instead. It's just yeah. Some people do. Some people like it.
Yeah, I mean it's something like I'm the same way with horror movies or anything.
Yes, of course,
I just it's not my cup of tea. Yeah, I don't need my heart doesn't need that stress.
No,
I'd rather run, go for a run.
Yeah, it's good that there are more of us. So this was really fun, man, talking to you. Yeah, and,
anytime, man. I like talking ideas. I like talking with like-minded souls about these ideas, because I do, like I said, I'm often in my own little bubble working, and it's you know, or reading or whatever. And I talk to my partner about stuff that I'm reading, and you know, bless her soul, she's amazing, but like, yeah, I feel bad that I subject her to these like, oh, I just read this philosophy argument, blah 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 blah, and I must just sound like the teacher in Charlie Brown, right? Like,
I know,
going, blah blah blah. So
I know what
so
you're
it's
taking
nice to
exactly.
talk to someone who it's nice to talk to someone who's engaged with the similar ideas and thoughts. So
yeah, the internet is a beautiful thing. No, but yeah, I can't wait to hear about your next projects as well, and just pay attention in general. So if some people want to follow your work, and I mean, of your own personal, but also of the Friend Generator sort of artist collective, which you have with a friend of yours, is that right?
Yeah, actually, it's a former student of mine who
Oh, okay.
approached me, I think 3 summers ago. I was working, I just started my early experiments, and he just reached out of nowhere. He's an independent game developer now.
Yeah,
And
cool.
he just reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to collaborate on something?" And I was like, "Actually, I have this project.
Nice.
I could use, a collaborator on it." So we just started working together, and yeah, it's been really great. For the last 2-3 years now. So
Yeah,
yeah.
cool.
But yeah,
So
they could you can get all our sort of social media feeds and everything from our website, which is just friendgenerator.club. That's our website, and then you can get all the social media information there if they want to follow our work.
nice. I'll add it in the
But
description
yeah,
for the YouTube as well. All right.
awesome.
Okay, really cool meeting you, man. So
Yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
we'll see each other around.
All right. All
Bye
right. See
bye.
ya, man. Thanks.